Welcome to the Mandala Podcast, where we help you feel your best body, mind, and soul.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. I just wanted to give a quick disclaimer and trigger warning for this episode. We do touch on some self-harm and suicidal ideation, and if that is a trigger for you, you should go ahead and click off of this video now. If not, enjoy the show.
Well, welcome back. Welcome back, Bree. How you doing?
Hey Charlie, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing terrific. And I know there was talk about us migrating into some different topics in the last episode. I took a sneak peek, and you had mentioned to me earlier in the week, or I guess it was last week. I'm losing track. But
Oh
there
my.
are no weeks in my mind. It's just all
Right.
one big.
Just
Life is
one day at
one
a
big
time.
day, right?
Yeah.
But I took a peek at some of these questions. You have your work cut out for you right now.
Yeah. I think I'm ready. I think I've mentally prepared myself, but I don't know. I mean, we'll see. Maybe I'll just have like a mental breakdown on the air. So we'll see what
Yeah,
happens.
yeah. But again, I applaud you not only in what you do, certainly with your practice there, but to come on and help
Well,
your help folks. I guess generally, just because these questions are coming from people who are finding you, not necessarily clients or anything. And
right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's the crazy part because obviously like I don't know the ins and outs of a lot of the details of these questions. So I'm trying to answer them as best I can with just
yeah,
what I'm given. But I think it kind of does speak to the effect that therapy can actually have on someone. When I actually know all the details, I'd probably be able to help a lot more, but, trying my
yeah,
best with the
yeah,
limited amount of information I'm given with these questions,
yeah.
so
All right. Well, you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. Question number one. I'm going to put my reading glasses on for this.
Okay. Are you getting old?
Oh, I'm not. It's all how you feel, right? But
Right.
it's nice to have these tools just in case my eyes are aging a little.
Yeah,
Anyway,
mine too. They have been for a long time, but it's okay.
so first question, I'm thinking about going to an appointment to talk about my anxiety and depression problems and wanting to seek a test for autism. I have a lot of papers showing some disabilities from my childhood, from school. Do I bring all the years of my documented disabilities I had? Next question is, if my doctor asks if I had thought about hurting myself and I answered truthfully, will they put me on a 72-hour hold? This makes me very nervous about seeking help. Boy, that's a great point. I never thought about that.
Yeah, that is a really good point. So, obviously, I can only address that from our state laws. I don't know where this person is or if they're in Florida, but I'm going to address it from
Yeah.
someone who would be in Florida and how it is here. But um, first question: if you have that stuff handy, like if you have your paperwork and stuff, bring it in. They may not even want it, but I mean, I wouldn't, I guess what I'm trying to say is don't go out of your way to get it. If they need it, they will contact whatever doctors or whatever, people you have from your past in order to facilitate that exchange. I wouldn't like go crazy or drive yourself crazy trying to like
Mhm.
locate all of these paperwork, pieces of paperwork from forever ago. So if you have them, bring them in. If you don't, I wouldn't worry about it. The second point, though, that is a really good point. So let's talk about what it means to be a mandated reporter and what it is that we are obligated by law to report and when and all of that kind of stuff. So here in Florida, um, a lot of people don't know this, but actually every adult is a mandated reporter. We think of therapists, we think of teachers, we think of, people in specific roles having to be mandated reporters. And obviously there's no really like legal repercussion for a lay person not reporting something, but it really is everybody's obligation to report certain things, such as child abuse, elderly abuse, those kind of things. So,
Hmm.
so when we get into talking about mandated reporting in Florida, in regards to self-harm, where we're talking about like a Baker Act situation. So there's really some key points that your therapist will probably ask. And it really is very standard for therapists to ask that in the very beginning. I do it on like an intake paperwork kind of form, just ask some questions about generally like if you've had thoughts about harming yourself, if you've acted on any of those things. But the main takeaway, the key components for that are we want to know not just that you had a thought about harming yourself. So having a thought about harming yourself does not constitute us doing a Baker Act. So it has to be the intent is there. There's a plan. That's a really big part of it. You have
Mm,
to actually have a plan. And you also have to have the means to carry that plan out. So, for example, if someone says to me, like, "Yeah, I've been thinking about it. I made a plan. My plan is to, drive my private jet up into the sun and disintegrate." Like, obviously, like that's not really realistic. So we would have a further conversation, but that's not going to constitute a Baker Act. Now, if they said, like, I have a weapon at home and my plan is to go home
mm,
and use it on myself, then yes. But that should definitely be something that every therapist is talking with their clients about before you get started. That's part of informed consent. And I think, I don't know when we sort of like got away from providing people the opportunity to give informed consent, but I think that that's important for you to know so that you can make that decision whether that's something that you want to share with your therapist or not. Obviously, we are mandated to report that kind of stuff, so we have to. But that should be something that your therapist is telling you up front and what that constitutes. So, like, you would have to say this, this, and this in order for me to have to call that in.
mm,
Now, if it's just a thought, like, oh, I thought about harming myself, I thought about taking my own life, like that does not constitute. You should be able to express that to your therapist without there being any sort of a Baker Act or anything like that, or a 72-hour hold is what they refer to it as. And typically it is 72 hours that they will hold you just to stabilize the situation. I think I can speak for myself and most mental health individuals when I say that it's a very flawed system. So what happens a lot of times is when we Baker Act someone, it actually ends up doing, like psychologically speaking, it ends up doing a lot more harm than good. And so it really is not something that we want to do without cause either. So it's something that we take very seriously and that we only want to do if we really feel like there is a need for it. So it's not something we don't want to like put you through unnecessary trauma, if
all right.
it doesn't warrant that. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. Yeah. And what happens during that 72 hours? Is it just observation or there
Uh
testing that goes on, or does it vary?
yeah, it varies. A lot of times it's medication, some sort of
Mm,
stabilization as far as
mm,
medication. You meet with a doctor, and they have to kind of assess the situation. They have to basically decide if they're going to release you in 72 hours or if they're going to keep you longer.
mm.
Their main objective at that point is to stabilize the situation and make sure that
Yeah.
you're safe. But unfortunately, what happens a lot of times is it's so traumatizing to go through that the minute that that person leaves, if they really had that suicidal ideation going on, it's right back as soon as they get out.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, I think the more important takeaway is just to, foster an environment with your client that they feel safe and comfortable talking to you about that kind of stuff before it actually gets to that point where they are not only contemplating it, but they have a plan and the means to carry
Mm,
it out. And like they're going to be talking to you about it way before it gets to that point, So hopefully you can kind of circumvent that actual like
yeah.
hold situation from going on.
All right. Well, question number two. I told one of my buddies I was depressed and the friendship completely faded and he like stopped responding to my text messages. I was best man in his wedding and thought it was safe to bring up because he talked to me about his self harm and depression experiences over the years. It makes me feel very lonely and worried about being vulnerable. I look very high functioning, happy, successful on the outside. And the few times I tried to open up about depression, I either wasn't believed or ghosted. I just feel a little unrelatable now and worried that a lot of my friendships aren't real. So I just stopped telling friends and family about my mental health and keep it to professional therapy sessions only. Therapy is helpful, but it does hurt that I have to pay someone to listen to me.
I think it's one of those things like we have to remember that people in our everyday life are not trained to hear trauma,
Mm,
especially trauma, and they really can experience secondary or vicarious trauma just by listening to somebody else's trauma. And, not everybody in your life can be great at all things. It sounds like he has a friendship with this guy and they, have a lot of different parts of facets of their relationship together that are really good, but maybe this guy just can't. And it sounds like he has some trauma himself. Maybe he just can't handle it. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, an important part of kind of setting boundaries with friends sometimes is if a friend is kind of like unloading on us or talking about their trauma or talking about their diagnoses, mental health wise or otherwise, sometimes we have to set a boundary with them as to like uphold that friendship because if we just, and sometimes it can just have to do with stress, like maybe our stress level is like through the roof already. And if just one more thing
Yeah.
and it's like
Yeah.
gonna be it for us. And so we have to set that boundary with them in order to like preserve our own mental health. And so I know it's hard to not take stuff like that personally, especially when you have a personal relationship with someone. But I think just try to keep in mind that they're really not, most people are really not good with that kind of stuff and they're just not
Yeah.
good at handling it. And I think instead of looking at it like, oh, you have to pay someone to talk to you, like, I think we need to kind of try to get away from that with mental health. Like, oh, I have to pay someone to listen to me talk. Like, we don't think of medical doctors like that. Like,
Right.
we don't think
Exactly.
like,
Yeah.
oh man, this sucks. I have to like go pay someone to listen to me about my medical problems. Like,
Mhm.
that's their job,
Right.
and we are trained to not absorb other people's trauma and we can let it go and live our normal lives and not be, like leave relatively unscathed. So like why not use that as a resource
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
burdening the people around you? You're definitely not a burden at all in regards to the stuff that you have going on. You just, not everybody can be great at everything. So we just have to keep
Yeah.
that in mind and give our friends and family a little bit of grace when it comes to that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Not take it so personally.
That's a great point. I mean, I never really thought about that. That person, you have no idea what they're going through, and
Mhm.
so you can't take it, I guess, personally. And then I guess the other side of it is the person who does listen and gives you advice that is so not helpful can
Yeah,
be even
right.
worse. So you know,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, because typically the people that we're kind of like unloading these things are like have skin in the game, so to speak.
yeah,
Like they have
yeah,
some sort at the very minimum, they have like an emotional connection to us. So, they're obviously not going to be able to be the most objective people
yeah,
and thus not able to give the best advice and things like that. So, um, please don't look at your mental health providers as like, oh, you're just having to pay them to listen to you. Like, we actually wanna help people. I mean, it's like it's our career is, like, how we make a living, but it's also, like, we're
yeah,
extensively trained in, like, being able to be actually helpful without being involved, and being
yeah.
able to be objective, so just use it as a resource as you would with any medical doctor.
Good stuff. All right. Next question. I've struggled with anxiety, especially when it comes to dating. I was so excited to have found someone that exceeds my expectations, has no red flags, and our values align. A good sign with my boyfriend is I feel safe and have no anxiety in the beginning, but we've only been together for 2 months. We moved fast, dated for 1 month, and I said love less than 2 weeks of being together. The other day, we were cuddling after spending the entire day together, and I felt some bad anxiety, maybe trapped or smothered, and asked him to leave. I need to be alone when I have bad anxiety and couldn't explain myself in the moment. For more context, we both highly enjoy physical touch, talk about boundaries, and are both waiting until marriage. I think I sometimes have anxiety with intimacy. The next day, we spent the day together, and I didn't feel like touching or being touched by him and experienced anxiety while being near him. I also feel a bit annoyed by him. It's like a switch flipped. Is this normal? And did we move too fast? I'm having a lot of doubts and struggling with some insecurities since being in this relationship. I appreciate any advice.
So I guess the piece I'm missing in this question, which I wish I had, was what was his reaction when you asked him to leave, kind of seemingly suddenly?
Yeah.
So I wish I knew that piece, but just going off of what I do know, um, this is definitely a conversation that you kind of like the last question too. These are definitely conversations that you want to have with someone in your life before it's happening. So, for instance, if you know that you struggle with anxiety and there are times where you may be fine and then you're not, and then you want to be alone, you don't want to be touched. That's a conversation that you want to try to have before it actually happens, because it's really hard to
Mm,
like have a conversation about those things in the midst of having a panic attack or like severe anxiety symptoms. So it's like you want to have that conversation like just in case. And chances are it is going to happen. And so then when it does happen, that person isn't completely caught off guard and they can just be like, "Oh, okay, this is what we talked about. Like I'm going to give her some space." I also think that a lot of people struggle with anxiety in relation to intimacy, especially if the relationship is new. So that part is definitely normal to have, varying levels of anxiety, because bottom line, like if you only have been dating this person for 2 months, like you don't know them that well. So there are things that could be said or done, or even not, just being in the same space as them sometimes can cause anxiety for people that are prone to anxiety if they just are around someone that they're not fully comfortable with. Now, although it said like the person said that they kind of jumped into things quickly, they said I love you quickly. That doesn't negate the fact that at the end of the day you really don't know them that well. And so I one, check in with yourself, see how you're feeling. This like kind of on again, off again kind of feeling, again, I think is very normal for relationships that are not actually have like a deep rooted foundation, which again, this relationship seems really quick moving. And so you may not have given it the time to like lay the foundation in order to, feel really solid about this person. That's why you may be experiencing some of like the flakiness, and as far as like, oh, I feel like a light switch like flipped off, or I don't feel the same about him as I did.
mm,
That honeymoon phase in the beginning that we feel, it's really easy to get caught up in that, but when that kind of fades away, um, it's normal to have like fluctuating feelings, and that's why in general, it's usually better to like wait a little bit before like pronouncing your love to someone when you don't really know them that well, because it is really easy to get caught up in that in the beginning when everything's really, really new and exciting and great. But just like I've been telling people, like we just came through this hurricane. I've been telling people that about the hurricane. Everybody right now is kind of like in survival mode, and everybody, it's just like day to day, and everybody's kind of putting the pieces back together. When all of that dies down, it's like, oh, then reality hits. Like that's when
mhm,
people are going to be experiencing PTSD symptoms and things like that. That's what can happen with somebody who experiences anxiety in a relationship, because everything is so go, go, go in the beginning. And it's so like, you feel all these feelings and butterflies and all this stuff. And when things start to kind of die down a little bit is when you actually have to sit with your feelings and how like the kind of the things you've been putting off and maybe not like dealing with or working on very hard this whole time. So it's when things start to like slow down a little bit that sometimes mental health related things can kind of rear their ugly head. And I don't think that it doesn't sound like this is something that you need to like end the relationship. I know for once I'm like, Don't end it." It's like the first time in history I've said that.
yeah, that's a good point.
Look at
Yes.
me, I'm progressing. But, I definitely think, like I said, that this needs to be a conversation that you have with them so that the next time this happens, they know how to respond, because,
Yeah.
it makes me think almost like they didn't respond well, or maybe didn't respond how you wished they had responded, hence why the next time you were around them, you kinda had, like, these
Yeah.
icky feelings about them. So, I hope that helps.
All right. Whew, this next one, I thank my lucky stars. I'm still a parent, but my kids are much older.
Mm.
So this question, I'm a mom of a 12-year-old daughter. Recently, my daughter told me about new friends in school who identify as transgender. Now she says she identifies as non-binary and thinks she may be trans as well. I'm very conflicted about this. She has never expressed any gender dysmorphia before and has always been a normal kid. Uh, Played with dolls, liked pink, all the stereotypical girly stuff. This seems like it's coming out of nowhere. Yesterday, she asked me to start puberty blockers. She wants to stop puberty until she can figure out her gender more. I've read that they are harmless, but I'm concerned. Any insight as a mental health professional? Wow.
Oh, yeah. This is a heavy
Wow.
one. So I I have a son. He's 1. And so I'm on the other end of that where I'm not having
Yeah.
to deal with that per se right now either, which I'm very thankful for. But I'm going to try to answer this the best I can from a mental health standpoint. So,
Yeah.
uh, all right. So, where do I start? First of all, talking about gender dysphoria. So, gender dysphoria is having this feeling, this disconnect between the way you feel inside and the way your body looks and things like that. So, I've had a lot, and I have a lot of adult transgender clients. Every single one of them express or has expressed to me at some point that they felt gender dysphoria at some point, or usually early in life. We're talking like 4 or 5 years old. So
Hmm.
it sounds like from this question, it sounds like your daughter has not experienced this, which leads me to believe that she is not actually transgender. Um, so that's the first thing. The second thing that is that we're seeing this, we as in like the mental health community are seeing this. Um, I actually looked up the numbers because I couldn't believe um, how many clients this was like coming up. All of it, it seemed like all of a sudden. I'm like, what is going on here? Why are all these kids like starting to
Yeah.
identify as like non-binary and transgender? So I actually looked this up recently, and they've done research. There's a 4,000% increase in the amount of kids now that are identifying as either non-binary or transgender, based on like a 10-year study. That's a lot. Okay. So historically, we found that maybe 1 in 100,000 people experience gender dysphoria. So would be considered a transgender um, person, male or female, whichever way. Okay. So I'm going to tell you about a conversation I had with a teen client that I had recently. And we were talking about transgender kids in her class. And I asked her, I said, how many transgender kids would you say are in your class? So in this one grade, in this one school. And she said, probably like 150.
What?
I was like, "What?" So that gives you an idea of the actual number of transgender people versus the number of kids in middle school who are identifying as either non-binary or transgender. So what that tells me is there's something going on here. It's not that there's just influx of kids that are transgender. It's just that kids are being kids, and they're being given an outlet to change things about themselves because they are uncomfortable. Everybody's
Hmm.
uncomfortable at that
Hmm.
age. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody has a solid grip on who they are as a human being at 12 years old. I definitely didn't.
Right.
So I think it's giving them this thing. And the other thing that I'm seeing, and that has been reported to me a lot lately, is kids in middle school and high school are also like, what I don't know that they refer to it as this, but it to me seems like almost like they're collecting diagnoses like, oh, well, I have anxiety and I have depression and I have
Hmm.
ADHD and I'm transgender and all of these things. And it's like, who has the most issues? It gives
Yeah.
them a talking point, it makes them relevant. All of these things that all kids want. They want to fit in, they want to feel like they belong to something. And so all of those things are very, very normal. It's just that now we are, as a society, giving kids this thing to hold on to that is actually really, really dangerous, in my opinion. So, and I'll tell you why.
Hmm.
So, um, talking about puberty blockers, because this person asked about
Yeah.
puberty
Yeah.
blockers. Um, I feel like that is a huge misconception that puberty blockers are harmless. I do not think that they're harmless at all. They have, so for anybody, I'm just going to kind of just say it in really simple terms. Puberty blockers are going to stop the development of secondary sex hormones in kids, typically kids that have not yet gone through puberty. Honestly, it's even worse. The studies that they've shown that they've done have shown that, like, for female patients that have started puberty blockers, that have actually started puberty already, like started menstruating, um, the effects are even worse long term for them. But the truth of the matter is, there are no studies that have shown anything long term, really long term, because this hasn't been a thing for
Yeah.
long enough for them to know what the long term effects of these puberty blockers are. But I can tell you some of the things that they do think are happening with them. One of them is osteoporosis, and just all sorts of bone density issues, because your body is not being able to develop in a normal way. Another thing is fertility issues. Now, kids at 11, 12, 13 years old may not care about that, but they probably will at some point in their life. And I would hate for them to make some sort of irreparable
Right.
decision to their body, which would make them infertile later on. I know plenty of people in their 30s that still don't know if they want to have kids. We definitely can't expect a
Mm.
prepubescent child to know if they want to have kids in the future, but we definitely don't want to take that opportunity away from them if that's something that they want to do. Um, also, the puberty blockers have also been shown to induce psychosis. So a lot of really serious stuff. So we talk a lot about, like, in the media, you hear like, oh, well, these kids are they're suicidal already. That's why we need to put them on puberty blockers. And all of the research shows that the suicide rate for these kids pre being exposed to puberty blockers or cross sex hormones or anything like that is significantly lower than from between 7 to 10 years after they actually transition, when they realize, like, "Oh, this is permanent. I've done permanent
Mm.
damage to my body. I can never go back." That's when the real suicidal ideation starts, at that point. And one of the really scary things about puberty blockers in particular, I think a lot of people don't know this, is the main drug that they use, and I'll call it a drug because it is a drug. People can call it medication, but it's a drug. Um, the main drug that they use in puberty blockers is a drug called Lupron. And Lupron historically has been used to chemically castrate sex offenders. And
Mm.
now we're giving it to kids and calling it puberty blockers, and
Wow.
telling people that it's fine and it's safe and it can just, it's like watching a movie. You just hit pause, and then when you're ready to resume, that's not how it works. And so this mom mentioned that her daughter is female, but like for males who take puberty blockers, if they truly are transgender, this is another thing that I think it's really hard for kids to see long term, and that's our job as parents to
Yeah.
look at the long term for them, because they don't have the foresight to do that for themselves. And one of the things with males who take puberty blockers is, because they aren't able to go through puberty because they're being chemically, unable to do that, their genitals are not growing. And so for someone who truly is transgender, and say at 20 he decides he wants to actually medically transition, like wants to have a surgery, the surgery now, which that's a whole nother subject, but the surgery is basically an inverted penis that they form into a vagina. That's the surgery, the bottom surgery, as people refer to it. Well, what happens is, when people take puberty blockers as a biological male and they aren't allowed to go through their natural puberty, they develop basically a micropenis, which is then not able to be
Mm.
inverted into a vagina, not a functioning vagina. So for
Right.
someone who really is transgender, even for that person, which I think it's very difficult to know that at that age anyway, but even if they really were, now they're going to have more issues as an adult trying to transition because of the damage that they've done to themselves as a teenager. So it's just a really it's a
Wow.
super loaded question.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I think people just need to realize that, not just because it's being pushed medically just because it's being talked about doesn't make it a good idea. Historically, we can look at other medical things that have happened in the past.
Yep.
Lobotomies come to mind,
Yeah.
people were getting lobotomies and it was this magical thing and, it could cure all these things. And we look back at it now and like that was completely inhumane. It was terrible. It didn't help anything. And I think that this push on, teenagers and
Yeah.
kids transitioning, I think that in history will be one of those things that we look
Yeah.
back on in the same light. So, I feel for you. Like I said, my son is really little at this point, and so this is not something I've personally had to go through, thank goodness. But definitely do more research. And I think we also as parents need to realize that like our job as parents is to be parents. It's not to be best friends with our kids. So if you have to put your foot down and say like no, this is not a good idea. This is not good for your health and I have to be the one to like be the bad guy, then you have to be the one to be the bad guy because if they really are transgender and they want to transition as an adult, they'll have no problem doing
Yeah.
that. There are a
Yeah.
lot of people that transition as adults that never went through puberty blockers or hormone replacement as a teenager or anything like that, and have had a completely successful transition and are fine. And so it's just something it's a really slippery slope.
Yeah.
So, don't I know it's easy for me to say, but don't be afraid to be the bad guy if you have to be because you are literally like I mean, this is a life altering thing. It's not this easy little thing. Just give it to them and you can start puberty at any time and it's fine and there aren't any side effects. Like it's just not true. I don't know where this narrative came from, but it's just not accurate.
Yeah.
So best of luck to you. It's a very, very difficult
Yeah.
situation, but going back to my first point being that there seems to be no gender dysphoria. I really feel like this is a phase for your child and not something that going to want to do irreparable and irreversible harm to them for something that's a fleeting thought or phase, even if they
Yeah.
get angry with you in the meantime. So I hope that helps.
Phew.
I
Wow.
know. Ooh, that's a hard one.
Wow. And you're right. I mean, we look back at our childhood, it's confusing. There's a lot of lessons, and
Completely.
we all just want to fit in. And
Mhm.
you got to wonder if part of that fitting in is, well, I fit in with this group. Let me be more like them, right? Um,
Exactly, and
mm,
I mean, I just think of and obviously, I'm not transgender, but I look at all the different even well into my 20s, the different things I wanted to do with my life and the
yeah,
different
yeah,
phases I had and the different styles and, it's all the evolution of me just, going off my own experience, and I'm just so glad that none of that was made permanent, so that I had the fluidity that I needed to adapt and change and be who I wanted to be currently and not be stuck in some version of myself that I thought was the version because I mean, especially as kids, you think all of them are the version, this is
yeah,
me, this is who I am. And then, as we all know, as we get older and we experience it, a lot of times it changes. So just
yeah,
give kids the ability to be fluid in who they are as a human being and not locked into anything by, giving them these drugs and things that will, literally change their life
mm,
forever.
yeah. There's no turning back, right?
No, exactly.
Wow, wow.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Well, Bree, that was more than I think anyone bargained for, and again, back to the saving grace of Bree Jaworski and your team there. I just back to what we just talked about. With kids and all they're exposed to, and ourselves. I mean, we all go through this. As you know, Barb and I, we just went through the Hurricane Ian and losing our
Yes.
home, and you
Oh,
mentioned the post traumatic stress disorder. Barb was in an auto accident years ago and suffered for a number of years. Unfortunately, got some good
yeah.
help, but
Yeah.
you know, we all go through those different phases of life, or our children, and it's just so nice that there there's a resource like yours. Obviously, you you're in Southwest Florida, but
Mhm.
doing this is huge, and I think it's a light for a lot of folks that, we it's so easy to feel alone, like no one
Yeah.
cares, like
Yeah.
the one question, and the message you're putting out there is, yeah, there's an answer. uh Come to the light, I guess. Is that a good way of saying it?
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure, and
yeah,
for anybody that's going through any of this stuff, and even if you just want to sit down with a counselor and talk about stuff, maybe not even that you're experiencing, but that your child is experiencing, or anything like that. I just hope that people know that you don't have to have a diagnosable, ailment or anything like that in order to seek out therapy. It could just be family dynamics and things like that. So for
yeah.
anybody listening, that even if they have somebody in their home that's dealing with mental health stuff, if they feel like they need support, like,
That's a
we
good
can be there
point.
for them as well.
Yeah, yeah. Feel better, right? It's all, boy,
Absolutely. Yeah,
if our head
100%.
isn't all right, life is, yeah, a
Infinitely
challenge to
more
say the
difficult.
least. Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
for sure.
yeah. So we got through half the questions in this episode. I
Yeah.
know you get questions just about every day, but you have some doozies the second half. So we're going to do this in two parts. So
Yes.
we will reconvene. I'll see you in the next episode.
Okay, awesome. And so we will see you guys in part 2, and if you have any suggestions for upcoming shows or anything like that, feel free to give us a shout over on our email.
All right. Thanks for listening to the Mandala Podcast. To learn more about Mandala counseling and health coaching, go to www.mandala-counseling.com. That's www.mandala, counseling, counseling.com, or call 239-360-1983, or visit us on Facebook or Instagram.